All right, everyone. So this ceasefire is obviously not going to be upheld. Donald Trump said that the Iranians and the Israelis would never shoot at each other ever again. He said that this ceasefire was going to last forever. Now, did Donald Trump actually believe that? I doubt it because, let's not forget the region that we're dealing with here. The Middle East is not exactly known to be a place where ceasefires are honored. But Donald Trump said that both Iran and Israel have violated the ceasefire. And he also said that Iran and Israel do not know what the F they are doing. And he was visibly upset because he was really marketing and praising this ceasefire as really the ceasefire that was going to end the war between Israel and Iran. But, to be honest with you, it's quite embarrassing for Trump because he went on to his Truth Social and he said, "Hey guys, Israel, Iran, please do not violate the ceasefire." He told Israel, "Please don't violate the ceasefire. Israel, please don't do this." It was almost like he was begging Israel not to violate the ceasefire because Israel is difficult to control. For example, before the Iraq War, George Bush said that he was going to speak with the United Nations to see if the UN would be okay with America going to war with Iraq. And Israel immediately went into a panic because Israel did not like any sort of likelihood for peace. And when Saddam Hussein agreed to allow the UN to inspect his weapons arsenal, to inspect his nuclear activities, Israel hated that as well because Israel did not like any sort of prospect of Saddam Hussein actually being compliant with the United Nations. Israel wanted to paint this picture of Saddam Hussein being this obstinate, stubborn tyrant who could not be reasoned with. But Saddam Hussein demonstrated that he could be reasoned with, and he said, "Okay, UN, you want to inspect my arsenal? Go right ahead." And he said he was okay with UN inspections. Israel hated this because they wanted to present Saddam Hussein as evil and as unreasonable and as a lunatic. And when Obama established the Iran deal in 2015, Israel hated this. Why? Because Israel hates any sort of idea, any sort of prospect, any sort of possibility of America reasoning with Israel's rivals. Because Israel wants America to be 100% on its side against Israel's rivals in the Middle East. And so if America says, "Hey, Israel, don't be violating any ceasefires," Israel hates this because Israel only loves America when America is totally just being a complete sycophant towards Israel. They only love America when America drapes itself with the Israeli flag. They only love Christians when Christians are kissing the Israeli flag, waving the Israeli flag, when Christians are clothing themselves with the Israeli flag, kissing the Talmud, reading the Talmud. They love that stuff because, well, in public, they will show great affection for Christian Zionists. But once Christians begin to say, "Hey, wait a second, what's up with this Talmud stuff? It says that Jesus was the son of a prostitute and that Jesus is drowning in excrement, and Christians are starting to notice that there are a lot of rabbis in Israel who hate Christians, and Christians in America are beginning to notice that they are Jewish fanatics in Israel who hate Christians and spit on Christians, and Christians have found a video of Ben Gvir saying that spitting on Christians is a Jewish tradition. Once Christians become noticers and they start noticing things, then all of a sudden you start to see the true colors come out, and you'll start seeing Jewish people, extremist Jews, hardliners, beginning to express their hatred towards Christians, and they'll say, oh, look, these Christians are anti-Semitic. And it's not just the hardliners who will come out and say this. You'll have these reformed Jewish rabbis coming out and saying that, oh, look, these Christians are anti-Semites because, oh, I don't know, they're critical of Israel or whatever. And the Jewish settlers who are friends of Christians will begin to express their animosity towards Christians once Christians become noticers. This is really the bottom line here. So this whole thing with Donald Trump getting mad at Israel really is a sign of the gradual process of American-Israeli relations deteriorating. I've always, not always, but for a long time, I have believed that this day will one day come. Because, well, it's quite obvious. Look at the history of the Jewish people. They have a history of not really being liked, and I'm not saying that that's right. I'm not saying that that's morally right. I'm not saying that that is principled, but it's just historical fact. Jewish people will acknowledge this. They have a history of just not being liked. And I don't believe that America will be exempt from this historical reality. And you are starting to see more and more anti-Israel sentiment increasing in the United States. And that explains the precipitous rise in popularity for people like Kanye West. I mean, Kanye West was famous before, but popularity for what Kanye West has to say about the Jewish people. This is why you see a popularity for people like Candace Owens, for people like Norman Finkelstein, for people like Norman Finkelstein is Jewish, but he is very critical of Israel. This is why you see a popularity for people like what's his name, Nick Fuentes, or Tucker Carlson, who was also critical of Israel and definitely critical of America's foreign policy towards Israel, which is excessively positive, excessively supportive for Israel. These figureheads are popular. Their opinions are popular because they are in agreement with what a lot of people are believing and feeling. And so this is all really a sign. It's a sign that really more and more Americans are anti-Israel. And their numbers are growing. Their numbers are growing, and eventually this will be reflected in America's stance, America's foreign policy when it comes to Israel. And there are people who will say, well, Donald Trump and Netanyahu are just playing a game. Because why else would Israel strike Iran? Okay, fine. Sure, right? America obviously knew that Israel was going to do a surprise attack on the Iranians. But at the same time, I also believe that America wants to control Israel. And Donald Trump obviously wants Israel to behave itself to a certain extent, or else he would not have said, please, Israel, do not violate the ceasefire. And you could say, well, it's all a ruse. You could say it's all an act. But why would Donald Trump humiliate himself by saying, okay, Israel, please don't violate the ceasefire, and then pretend to be angry at Israel? If this is all acting, then nonetheless, it shows that Donald Trump cannot control Israel. And I don't think Donald Trump wants to project this facade that he cannot control Israel, which leads me to believe that this is not acting. It leads me to believe that the Israelis really are refusing to comply with the demands of the United States. It leads me to believe that the Americans are getting frustrated with the Israelis because the Israelis have demonstrated that they don't want to obey. They don't want to acquiesce to the Americans. So people could say, well, Trump is acting. Well, why would Trump present himself as someone who cannot control the Israelis? Obviously, Donald Trump wants to present himself, and he wants to give off the facade that he is someone who is in control. But by telling the Israelis, hey, don't do this, and then they do it, or they act like they're going to do something in violation of the ceasefire, it shows that Donald Trump cannot control the Israelis. And Donald Trump doesn't like this, obviously not, because Donald Trump is someone who wants to give off the facade, at least, that he is in control. So people see this and they say, look, the Israelis don't listen to the Americans. The Israelis don't even listen to our big alpha male Donald Trump. So what the hell are we going to do? And this is only going to give the Tuckerites more and more propaganda fodder against the Cruzites. And for those of you who don't know, the Tuckerites are people who act, or not act, but people who express the same positions as Tucker Carlson, hence the term Tuckerite. Tucker Carlson is by far the biggest voice in the United States against America's current foreign policy in regards to Israel. Tucker Carlson does not like this excessive support for Israel that the United States has had for a very long time. And he definitely does not like American Christian Zionism, which was exemplified when he confronted Ted Cruz on his Zionism. And Ted Cruz said, oh, well, I support Israel because the Bible tells me to. So you have the Tuckerites, and then you have the Cruzites. The Cruzites are people who are like Ted Cruz. These are your pro-Israel, Zionist Christians who worship Israel. Their religion revolves around Israel because they believe that someone's Jewish genes somehow makes them exempt from criticism, because if you try to criticize Israel, the Christian Zionists will attack you and they will get upset with you because, according to their religion, Israel is exempt from any sort of criticism. So they have a religion, a cult of Israel. And for them, the church really is less important than the Jewish race. And if someone has Jewish genes, that automatically makes them special because, according to them, according to the Christian Zionist, they have to continuously bless the people who have Jewish genes. So their blessing is based on genetics. Their religion is fixated on genealogy, which is amazing because St. Paul told us not to focus on genealogy. So they go quite contrary to Christianity. But the Tuckerites are dominating. I mean, watch any sort of debate between Adam Smith and a Zionist. Or sorry, not Adam Smith, David Smith. Watch any sort of debate between David Smith and a Zionist. Watch any sort of debate between a pro-Israel person and a pro-Palestine person on the Piers Morgan YouTube channel, which is infamous for hosting debates between pro-Israel people and pro-Palestine people. And read the comments section underneath these debates. You will see generally that the people who are critical of Israel dominate the comment sections. If you watch, for example, the debate between a hospice by the name of Jonathan, whose last name I do not remember, and an Egyptian comedian by the name of, what's his name? I forgot his name. He's an Egyptian comedian. What's his name? Bassam Youssef. Bassem Youssef. Bassem Youssef is an Egyptian comedian who is very critical of Israel, and he debated an Israeli hospitalist by the name of Jonathan. Read the comments underneath that debate. The great majority of the comments are in support for Bassem Youssef. And Bassem Youssef stated something that was quite astute at the end of the debate. He said to Jonathan, the hospitalist, no one believes you. No one believes you guys anymore. It doesn't matter what Israel says. Nobody believes Israel. Nobody believes you. And you know what? He's right. People don't really believe Israel as much as they used to. Now, back in 2001, Israel could have told people that Osama bin Laden was planning on building nuclear warheads underneath their mother-in-law's houses. And they would have believed him. They would have believed Israel. Back in 2001, Israel could have come out and said, hey, the Iranians are actually building nuclear warheads underneath the ground of some suburban American neighborhood, and people would have believed that bullshit. That's how pro-Israel people were at that time. And really, in the early 2000s, early 2010s, Christian Zionism was very dominant. But this has changed precipitously, and we really saw this change really manifest itself in 2023, once Israel began its bombing campaign of Gaza. And really the anti-Israel sentiment showed itself, manifested itself in real time. And people just don't believe it anymore. They don't believe the propaganda. They don't believe the Zionist propaganda. And a lot of this has to do, it's not just the bombing of Gaza. A lot of this has to do with Iraq. A lot of this has to do with the Iraq war. There was a book that came out some years ago. It was called The Israel Lobby by a guy by the name of John Mearsheimer. And I read that book back in 2018. And I remember doing video commentaries on that book. I did several videos, all of which are no longer on YouTube because YouTube took my channel down because, they said that I was breaking the rules. But I'm thinking I should re-upload those videos in which I talk about John Mearsheimer's book, The Israel Lobby. But in that book, John Mearsheimer talks about how excessive the influence was for the Iraq war coming from the Israel lobby, that the Israel lobby, the neoconservative Zionist lobby in the United States, had undue influence over the U.S. government. It had excessive influence, and it was pushing hardcore for the Iraq war. And it was pushing for the Iraq war under the auspices of an organization called PNAC, which stands for Project for the New American Century. And in 1998, these neoconservatives, on behalf of the Project for the New American Century, wrote a letter pushing Congress to support a war against Iraq. And in the same year, they wrote a second letter. These same neocons wrote a second letter pushing for the same damn thing. And these neocons, they were people like Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, etc. And they're all neoconservatives, they're all Zionists. Now, here's the thing. People will say, well, the Iraq war had nothing to do with Israel. Israel had no say-so at all in the Iraq war. It was Donald Rumsfeld. It was George Bush. It was these people. They're the ones who are at fault. Okay, fine. Let's say that you're right. Let's say that Israel had nothing to do with America going to war with Iraq. Regardless of that, if you look at all the people in America who were pushing for the Iraq war, if you look at all of the people who supported the Iraq war, every single damn one of them was a Zionist. Every single damn one of them was a Zionist. Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, every damn one of them, they were all Zionist. They were all pro-Israel. If you look at all the Christians who were supporting the Iraq war, they were all Christian Zionists. If you look at all the pastors who were telling their congregants to support the Iraq war, they were all Christian Zionists. Every damn one of them. TBN, John Hagee, Schmagee, every damn one of these people were Zionist. and are Zionists if they're still around. So no matter how you look at it, the Iraq War was pushed by Zionists. Here's my point. When I was doing video commentaries on John Mearsheimer's book, The Israel Lobby, I noticed that a lot of people were agreeing with me. And I began to notice that there was a shift that was taking place in American society. And it was a shift that I had never seen before. It was quite surreal to me because I was so used to, and I was so accustomed to Americans being excessively pro-Israel. And I remember one night I was sitting with my dad, and I was talking with my dad, and I told my dad, I said, you will see one day the whole world turn against Israel. Not just the Middle East, not just the Muslim world, but the Western world. You will see, I told my dad, you will see Westerners hating Israel. It'll happen. You will see a shift. And in 2018, I did a video talking about how the second Holocaust could actually happen. And I posed the question. I said, could the Holocaust actually happen? And I said, yes, it could. And I talked about how there was an article that had been published by the major German publication Der Spiegel on the pro-Israel lobby in Germany. In fact, there is a pro-Israel lobby in Germany, and it is quite influential. And for example, the Germans back in the early 2000s wanted to import liquid natural gas from Iran. The Germans did. And the pro-Israel lobby in Germany didn't like this. And the Zionists in the United States didn't like this, right? All the pro-Israel people didn't like this. And they began to pressure Germany not to buy liquid natural gas from Iran. And the Germans said, okay, fine, we won't do it. And when Donald Trump was talking about pulling out of the Iran deal, the Germans objected to this. They said, no. The Germans have always, the Germans are by far the most sympathetic to Iran out of all of the Western countries. Maybe you could say France is another one, but the Germans definitely have been more open to Iran. The Germans have definitely embraced Iran more so than the United States. We can at least say that. And so the pro-Israel lobby in Germany has worked to pressure the Germans not to do anything to Iran's favor. And so Der Spiegel published an article, I want to say this was back in 2018, basically talking about this pro-Israel lobby in Germany. And you had these German politicians saying that, yes, there is a lobby that is pro-Israel, and it is not working for Germany's interest, it is working for Israel's interest. And it was quite surreal to see German politicians talking like this. And it was quite surreal to see a major German publication writing an article of this nature, speaking of a Israel lobby in Germany. So I began to notice a shift in 2018. And I did a video in 2018 saying one day this could, I didn't say this, I did not say that this was going to emphatically happen, but I spoke of this as a possibility, as a possible scenario. And I said, there is a possibility that one day the Germans will say, we have had enough of Israel telling us what to do. We have had enough of America telling us what to do. Because remember, the Germans had their Nord Stream 2 pipeline with the Russians. They were getting Russian natural gas directly from their hope was to establish the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to get liquid natural gas directly from the Russians. The Americans objected. Ted Cruz objected. They began to put sanctions on European companies involved in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Eventually, the Americans just destroyed it during the beginning part of the Russian-Ukraine war. But I said in my video in 2018 that one day the Germans could say, we're tired of the Israel lobby telling us what to do. We're tired of Israel telling us what to do. We're tired of the Americans telling us what to do. And one day the Germans could join the Muslim world against Israel. And one day the Germans could say, you know what, let's resume from where we left off back in the 1940s. I said this in the video. YouTube took it down. They said that I violated terms of service. I don't know how. I was simply warning people about a second Holocaust, not because I was in glee of the idea of another Holocaust, but I did that video as a warning to Israel, as a warning to the Jewish people, as a warning to humanity in general, that because history does rhyme, it doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it sure as hell does rhyme. Because history does rhyme, and in a way, because history runs in cycles and people go back to the ways of the past to a great extent, the Holocaust can definitely happen again. And the Germans could one day actually go back to the ways of their recent ancestors. And why did I say that in 2018? Because I noticed the shift. Now, people like to make it out to be that, well, anti-Jewish sentiment is it's mainly a Middle Eastern thing. It's just the Muslim world. And people love to say this sort of thing, especially Zionist, Western Jewish people, people who are pro-Israel. They love to say this sort of thing. It's the Muslim world, it's the Middle East, not us Westerners. The West is the best. Here we have Western civilization, and we love the Jewish people and all this stuff. And it's true that to a great extent, in the post-World War II era, right, Westerners have been much more pro-Israel. They've been much more sympathetic to the Jewish people than the Muslim world has, absolutely. But let's not forget here that for a huge chunk of Jewish history, the Jews lived in Europe. And when they were living in Europe, they were hated. Not all the time, but for a lot of times, for a lot of the time, they were hated. They were hated in Poland. They were hated in Ukraine. They were hated in Russia. They were hated in France. They were hated in England. They were eventually hated in Spain, although the Spaniards were to a great extent, much more tolerant than the English were. The English and the French had deported their Jewish populations before the Spanish did. But eventually the Spanish also exiled their Jewish population. They were hated in Cyprus. They were hated in the Roman Empire. And so, even when the Jewish people were living in the West, there was tension between Westerners and Jews. There was hatred and antagonism between Westerners and Jews. It's just a fact of history. So who's to say that the Westerners will not go back to that very sort of antagonism? Who is to say that history will not rhyme or repeat? And so we are seeing, it's not just Trump, the whole thing with Trump getting frustrated with Israel because he can't control Israel and Israel doesn't acquiesce to his requests. These are all signs. These are all signs of fault lines. These are all signs of cracks in the world order. The world order is supposed to be that America and Israel are supposed to be deep and very strong allies. But we're seeing cracks. We're seeing cracks in the social order. We're seeing cracks in the post-World War II established order. And a lot of this has to do with really the decline of the American empire. This is why we see the Germans talking about reviving their military power, because they say, well, we can't really rely on the American empire. This is why we see the Turks talking about making their own, and this is why we see the Turks currently developing their own fighter jet, their own 5th generation fighter jet. This is why we see the Germans doing their first ever European military deployment since World War II. They are now German soldiers stationed in Lithuania, and their numbers are going to grow in the coming years. I think right now they are 700 German soldiers stationed in Lithuania, but the plan is that there's supposed to be 5,000 in the future. So their numbers are going to grow. Why is this happening? Why are the Germans working on reviving their military strength? Why are the Turks working on reviving their empire? It's because the American empire is declining. And so these regional powers say, okay, we have to now revive our own powers. Go back to the way things used to be. Germany wants to control Europe. Turkey wants to control the Middle East. Iran also wants to control the Middle East, so we see the revival of Persian power. Russia invading Ukraine is also a sign of really this declining empire. And it reminds me of the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire was in its forever war with the Parthians, who were an Iranian people, the Roman Empire went through some massive instability. And one of the things that happened was the Jews tried to do a massive revolution within the Roman Empire. And they did a coordinated war, really. It's called the Kitos War. They did a coordinated war in North Africa, Cyprus, and in Judea. And I also believe in Lebanon. And the Jewish fanatics, in their war against Rome, butchered hundreds of thousands of people. Why did these Jewish revolutionaries do this? Because they saw an opportunity. And the opportunity was Rome is bogged down in its war against the Parthians. And that was a sign of instability within the Roman Empire. So Germany's saying we can't really rely on the Americans. Turkey's saying we want to become more and more militarily independent. And Turkey working on making its own indigenous 5th generation fighter jet are all signs of regional powers rising up, working to become independently powerful, militarily independent. These are all signs of the American empire declining. And these regional powers that are under the American satellite, under the American empire, just rising above the status quo and working to become independently, militarily powerful. And so the Americans, they see that they can't control the Israelis. Donald Trump is visibly frustrated with the Israelis. Now, I know I said in one of my last videos that the Americans stabbed the Iranians in the back, and they did. But still, I don't believe that Donald Trump wants to have this facade that he can't control the Israelis. And the Israelis are showing that they don't want to be told what to do. And so eventually the Tuckerites are going to have their way. And they're going to say, you know what? You guys don't respect us. You guys don't listen to us. You guys didn't really listen to President Trump. So why in the hell should we respect you? And I think eventually the Americans are going to throw the Israelis under the bus. And they're going to leave Israel out to dry. And the Israelis are going to be alone. And they're going to have to face Iran. And they're going to have to face Turkey all alone. And I've talked about this many times, but the Turks are working on making themselves more militarily independent. They are making their military quite powerful. The Israelis are more powerful than... the Turks are more powerful than the Israelis in every dimension of warfare, with the exception of Air Force and nuclear. The Turks... from what we understand, from what we know, do not have a nuclear weapon, but they will. They will eventually have nuclear weapons. They are, in fact, American nuclear bombs stationed in Turkey. But once the Turks establish a substantially powerful air force, then they will be either on par with Israel or more powerful than Israel. And the Turks and the Israelis are in competition over Syria. And the Israelis are telling the Turks what to do. They're saying, hey, Turkey, we don't want you to control those air bases in Syria. because there were all these air bases that were left alone after Bashar al-Assad fled Syria. And the Turks are telling the Israelis to go F themselves. The Israelis want to control the Turks, but the Turks are not a country they're not a country that Israel will have the capability to control. And so eventually there's going to be a clash. And I think that what's going to happen is the Americans are going to sit back and they're going to say, okay, Israel, you're messing with our NATO ally. You're messing with a NATO member. And we're not going to help you. And Israel will be left to its own demise. The tide is turning against Israel. As the Bible says, the lovers of the harlot of Babylon will abandon her. And that will be the fate of the Israelis. Anyway, you guys have just heard some theology. God bless.